This is Forensic Disconnect, and this is the story of Nolan Xavier Wells, built from what's actually been said on the record, by name, and from what, weeks later, still doesn't add up. Before Nolan Wells was a case number, he was a kid who cooked his mother's salmon the night before a holiday. That detail matters more than it sounds like it should. Christine Wansley has told that story more than once, in more than one interview, and it never loses its weight. The night before July 4th, before the trip to Horn Island, before any of what followed, Nolan stood in his mother's kitchen and made her dinner. Salmon. Not a big production, just a son who liked to cook, in a house he was about to leave for the holiday, doing something small for the woman who raised him. He hugged her, told her he loved her, and walked out the door. Nolan was 18, a graduate of Ocean Springs High School, a wide receiver who had just started his career at Southwest Mississippi Community College, chasing a future in football that his family says he took seriously, the kind of seriousness that shows up in small ways, in the discipline of a training schedule, in a body he was building for a purpose. Friends describe him as big-hearted, energetic, the kind of person who never met a stranger, who could walk into a group he didn't know and be part of it inside of 10 minutes. His mother calls him a special soul, someone whose entire instinct was to make the people around him feel included rather than left out. That instinct is worth sitting with, because it's part of what makes the day he disappeared so hard to make sense of. This was not a withdrawn kid, not someone who drifted to the edges of a group and got lost in the noise. By every account from the people who knew him, Nolan was the one who pulled other people in. We want to open this episode by anchoring on something specific, because it's the through line for everything we're about to walk through. Two separate pieces of evidence spread to hundreds of thousands of people in this case, and both of them turned out to be false. Understanding exactly how they were built, how they spread, and how they eventually fell apart tells you something important about how this entire case has been covered, and it sets up the one contradiction underneath both of them that still hasn't been resolved. On the morning of July 4th, 2026, Nolan traveled to Horn Island with a group of friends, a barrier island off the Mississippi Gulf coast, roughly 10 miles from Ocean Springs, reachable only by private boat, no buildings, no cell service across most of it, no lifeguards, no medical facilities, nothing but sand, water, and whoever else decided to show up that day on a holiday weekend. That meant hundreds of people, music, boats anchored along the shoreline, the kind of gathering that's been tradition along that stretch of coast for years. Nolan was last seen by his group of friends sometime around 3 in the afternoon. Blue swim trunks, no shirt, sunglasses. According to the account his friends have given, he had spent part of the afternoon talking to a young woman he'd met that day. According to that same account, when the group's boat developed mechanical trouble and had to head back to the mainland early, Nolan chose to stay behind, planning to catch a ride back later with someone else. He never made it home. Here is what the public record actually establishes, stripped of speculation, in order. Nolan's group left the dock that morning at roughly 9:56 and arrived at Horn Island at 11:14, according to GPS data later obtained by CBS News through a records request to the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources. For several hours, by every account, the day looked like an ordinary holiday. Swimming, drinking, music, a crowd stretched along the island's northwest tip. Around 3 in the afternoon, Nolan's friends say he was last seen near that stretch of shoreline, talking with a young woman later identified publicly as Katie. Sometime after that, accounts vary on the exact minute, the boat Nolan's group had arrived on began taking on water. A bilge pump had reportedly failed. The group made the decision to head back to the mainland early, and according to the account given by one friend's mother, a chancery judge named Ashley Cole, that departure happened around 4:30. At 4:31, GPS data confirms the boat left Horn Island. It returned to its original dock, then traveled into Fort Bayou around 5:52, back to the dock by 6:06, out again to a boat launch at 7:19, and from there, overland, presumably towed by a vehicle, to the boat owner's residence in Biloxi. That is a confirmed machine-logged record of the vessel connected to Nolan's friend group on the afternoon and evening of July 4th. Sometime around 11 that night, one of Nolan's friends contacted the Coast Guard. Nolan's mother, Christine, contacted the Jackson County Sheriff's Office not long after. Once it became clear her son hadn't come home and wasn't answering his phone, a phone that, as it turned out, wasn't with him at all. It was still on the boat, left behind with a pile of other phones on the dash. the way teenagers heading into open water on a hot day sometimes leave their devices to keep them dry. A search began the next day. The Coast Guard, the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, the National Park Service, and eventually a volunteer search and rescue group with a long history of showing up for exactly this kind of case. For 2 days, they searched the water and the shoreline around Horn Island. On July 6th, a National Park Service ranger found Nolan's body in the water off the island's northwestern tip, close to where he'd last been seen 2 days earlier. Formal identification didn't come through a visual confirmation from a family member. It came through dental records. That detail alone tells you something about the condition in which he was found, even without anyone spelling it out further than that. Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter's office made its first public statement not long after. "There's no information that we have right now that would lead us to believe that a crime has occurred," the sheriff told reporters. The coroner said there were no immediate signs of physical injury. For a lot of people watching this case unfold, that sentence, delivered within days of a body being pulled from the water, is the moment everything else about this case started to feel rushed. The sheriff's office has since said its language has changed as the investigation has developed. In a more recent update, the sheriff confirmed his department has been conducting formal witness interviews and that his office has been in direct contact with outside agencies, including the FBI. "Tips from the public," he said, "have moved this case forward in a real way this past week. We got a lot of valuable information that has come from the public," he told reporters. "This investigation is active. It's ongoing." Compare that to the sentence that first lit this story on fire online, and the shift is hard to miss. It doesn't mean the department has reversed itself, and it doesn't mean the FBI has taken over the case. Local sheriff's departments bring in federal partners for all kinds of reasons that fall well short of a full takeover. What that shift does tell you, at minimum, is that a small county sheriff's office has expanded this investigation well past what it can manage entirely on its own. Now let's walk through the 2 pieces of viral evidence we opened this episode with, in detail, because how they fell apart matters as much as the fact that they did. The first is a photo. It surfaced alongside a Facebook post from an account Nolan's mother later confirmed she had never spoken to and never met. The claim in that post was dramatic, that Nolan had actually returned from Horn Island alive, attended a pool party in Jackson County, gotten into an altercation, was beaten, and that his body was taken back to the water afterward. A photo circulated alongside it, uploaded to Instagram by an account with fewer than 1,000 followers, deleted shortly after, appearing to show Nolan in a pool surrounded by a group of people. Within hours, it had reached hundreds of thousands of viewers. Attorney Ben Crump reposted the image to his own account, and for a huge portion of the internet, that repost became the moment the theory turned into accepted fact. But Crump's caption, which most people scrolled straight past, said something very different from what people took away from it. He wrote that he didn't know whether the claims were fact or rumor, and that his team was following all clues until the truth was found. The question of when that photo was actually taken had an answer. Rolling Stone found it alongside photo metadata obtained independently and published their findings on July 13th. The photo was taken on June 27th, 8 days before the 4th of July, not after Horn Island, 8 days before Nolan ever boarded that boat. The party had taken place in Pass Christian, Mississippi. The person who confirmed the date and identified everyone in the photo, including Nolan, was Trakiston Shepard, a close friend of Nolan's, part of the same friend group, who hadn't even attended that particular party but knew who was in it. According to Shepard, the image wasn't posted as evidence of anything. It went up on July 5th as part of a casual photo dump, a batch of recent memories shared online, the kind almost anyone posts without thinking twice. Uploaded on July 5th and taken on June 27th are 2 very different things, and that distinction is the entire foundation the viral theory was built on top of. Shepard's response to the theory that grew out of that photo was blunt. He called it unbelievable. He called it heartbreaking. We think it's worth pausing on this specific sequence because it illustrates a mechanism that shows up again and again in cases like this one. A private social media account with almost no followers made a specific, dramatic claim. That claim, on its own, likely would have stayed contained to a small corner of the internet. What actually launched it into hundreds of thousands of views wasn't the original post. It was a public figure with genuine credibility and a massive following amplifying it, even while explicitly hedging that he didn't know if it was true. The hedge itself became invisible the moment the repost happened, because a repost from someone with Ben Crump's platform functions for most viewers as an implicit endorsement regardless of the caption attached to it. That's not a criticism specific to Crump. It's a structural feature of how amplification works on social platforms generally, and it's worth understanding as its own phenomenon separate from whether any individual claim happens to be true. The second piece of viral evidence was a video, shot from a boat near Horn Island, capturing a heated exchange between voices, one of them allegedly demanding a phone back. Ben Crump described it on Good Morning America, saying he believed the voice belonged to Nolan. You can hear an argument going where Nolan is saying, "Give me my freaking phone, what are you freaking doing?" The person actually in that video eventually spoke for himself. It was Traceston Shepard again, the same friend who'd identified the pool photo's real date. He told ABC News plainly, "That's the video I'm referring to, and that's me yelling." He hadn't been in a dispute with Nolan at all. He'd been in a separate altercation with a stranger, and two friends were physically restraining him at the time. According to ABC News, Shepard gave an official statement to the Jackson County Sheriff's Department confirming this on the record, not internet commentary, an actual statement to investigators. We think it's worth pausing on the audio identification specifically too, because "I recognize the voice" is a claim that sounds more definitive than it actually is forensically. Voice identification by ear, without a formal audio comparison, is considerably less reliable than most people assume, particularly with a short clip, a chaotic outdoor environment, and heightened emotional stakes shaping how confidently someone hears what they expect to hear. That doesn't mean Crump acted in bad faith presenting that identification. It means an informal, ear-based identification of a voice in a chaotic recording is inherently less reliable than a fingerprint or a DNA match, and treating it with that same weight of certainty before an actual named source confirmed otherwise is exactly the kind of gap this case has repeatedly fallen into. Two pieces of evidence, both introduced after Nolan's death, both eventually walked back, one by the reporting that dated the photo, one by the very person whose voice was actually on the recording. Ben Crump himself acknowledged the shift publicly, saying his team had been told one thing by one witness, reported it out, and then another witness came forward saying otherwise, and that going forward, his team would be more careful to frame things as what a specific witness said rather than as confirmed fact. We think that acknowledgement deserves real credit, because walking back a public claim is considerably harder, reputationally, than never making it in the first place, and it's worth noting explicitly rather than letting it disappear into the broader noise of this case. Why does any of this matter if both of these leads turned out to be dead ends? Because it tells you something the rest of this case desperately needs you to understand. Confirmed, disputed, and unknown are not interchangeable categories, and this case has had all three swirling together in the same comment section for weeks. The pool photo is confirmed false, dated to a different day entirely. The yelling voice is confirmed to belong to someone else, on the record, to two separate outlets. Set both aside entirely, and there's still a genuine, unresolved contradiction sitting underneath them, one that never depended on either piece of fabricated evidence to exist. Here is where the story stops being simple. According to the account Nolan's friends have given to reporters and reportedly to investigators, Nolan chose to stay behind on Horn Island. He wanted to keep talking to a girl he met that day. He planned to catch a later ride back to the mainland. That is the story that has anchored nearly every piece of coverage on this case since the beginning. But there is another account, and it comes from the one person who was actually having that final conversation with Nolan. Her name is Katie. Until attorney Ben Crump raised it publicly, and until her own family confirmed it, almost nobody covering this case outside of Nolan's own inner circle had said that name out loud. Katie has not given a direct, on-camera interview to any outlet. As far as the public record shows, what exists instead is an account relayed by her sister, Gracie McCormick, who posted publicly on Facebook to lay out what her sister remembers from that afternoon. According to that post, Nolan's friends had been pressuring him to wrap up his conversation with Katie so he could get on the boat with them. Katie spoke with Nolan, and based on that conversation, she assumed he was heading back toward the boat he'd originally arrived on, not staying behind. She made it home safely that day, on a completely different boat, picked up by other family members. The post also states that Katie assumed the friends telling Nolan to get on the boat wouldn't have left without him, and that her family has already given, in their words, all the answers they can give to both Nolan's mother and to investigators. We want to be precise about what we actually have and don't have here, because getting this wrong in either direction does a disservice to everyone involved, including Katie herself. What we have is a secondhand account, Katie's version, filtered through her sister, posted on social media, not a sworn statement, not a direct on-record interview. A Facebook post from a family member, filtered through grief, through the instinct to protect someone who has already been dragged into a national story she never asked to be part of. It is a real account from a real source, and it deserves to be taken seriously. But it is not the same thing as Katie speaking for herself under oath and treating it as though it would be its own kind of misinformation, exactly the kind we just spent the first half of this episode walking through. What strengthens the underlying contradiction, though, is something separate entirely. Javon Williams, described by Nolan's own family and friends as his best friend, and who was also on Horn Island that day, gave an on-the-record interview to the Biloxi Sun-Herald. He said he last saw Nolan sometime after 4 p.m, hanging out with a girl and other friends, and that both Nolan and the girl had left their phones behind on the boat Nolan originally arrived on. He also told CNN something that cuts directly against the version the friend group has told publicly. In his words, "I've never known Nolan to stay back while his friends leave. He's always been a guy where if he rode with you, he's going to come back with you. That's always how he's been, every single time." That's not a rumor. That's a named source, on the record, in 2 separate outlets, describing a lifelong pattern of behavior, not speculating about what happened, but stating plainly that the version of events being told publicly doesn't match the person he's known for years. Put those 2 accounts side by side, and you get a best friend saying this isn't who Nolan was, and a young woman's family saying he told her he was headed back to the boat. Neither one, on its own, proves what happened to Nolan Wells. But together, they raise the exact question his own father raised from the very beginning of this case. Why would this be the one day nobody broke the only rule his parents ever asked of him? If you go with the group, you stay with the group. There's more sitting underneath that contradiction too, and none of it resolves cleanly on its own. Police reports listed Wells as wearing black shorts the day he disappeared. His mother says photos from that day, shared with her by a young woman who was on the island, show him in blue swim trunks. It sounds small. It might genuinely be nothing. People misremember clothing all the time, especially describing someone secondhand hours or days after the fact. But it's exactly the kind of small, specific detail that shouldn't require a grieving mother to go hunting down photographs herself in order to catch it. His family also says they had a strange, uncomfortable experience trying to get his car keys back. Keys that had been left in a driveway belonging to one of his friends, not handed over, not dropped off with the family directly, left in a driveway, the same way his phone ended up needing to be tracked down using a location app rather than simply returned by the friends who'd had it. Every item that should have come back to this family automatically, his keys, his phone, a clear account of his last hours, has instead had to be tracked down or dug up by the family on their own. And then there's the phone itself. Once Christine had it in hand, she says she found something that didn't sit right. Nolan updated his Snapchat constantly, the way most 18-year-olds do, several times a day without a second thought. But there was no activity at all in the 24 hours before he disappeared. Total silence from an account that was never silent. The location data attached to the account, according to the family, didn't match where the phone was later physically found. That mismatch alone doesn't prove anything was tampered with. Phone location data drifts and lags all the time, especially near open water with spotty cell coverage. But pair an account that suddenly stopped posting the exact day its owner went missing, and it's the kind of detail that deserves a real explanation instead of a shrug. It's also worth pausing on how this discrepancy actually reached the public, because the path matters. Attorney Ben Crump raised the contradiction himself at a press conference, standing next to Nolan's parents. "The glaring contradictions just jump out at you," he said. A young woman he was talking to says that Nolan said he was going back to get on the boat with the boys. The boys say that Nolan told them he was going to stay and talk to the young woman. It's a contradiction. They're not saying the same thing. One of them is telling the truth. One of them is not. Crump also pointed to Nolan's phone as part of the same puzzle. What teenager, he asked, leaves their phone behind if they're planning to stay on the island? It's a fair question, and also an incomplete one, since multiple friends have separately told reporters that leaving phones on the boat's dash was standard practice for the entire group that day to keep them away from salt water. Both things can be true. It can be normal for a group of friends to leave their phones on a boat, and it can still be the specific detail that makes a grieving family's stomach turn when they're the ones trying to reconstruct their son's last hours from the outside. None of these details, taken individually, proves that anything happened to Nolan beyond a tragic accident. Clothing gets misremembered. Keys get left behind after a long day in the sun. Phones get handed off in a panic and forgotten. Any one of these, on its own, is exactly the kind of loose end you'd expect from a chaotic, unsupervised holiday on a crowded island. But all of it together, the shorts, the keys, the phone, the Snapchat silence, and at the center of it, two people who were both there for Nolan's final conversation, telling two different stories about which direction he walked, is a lot of small, specific things a family has had to dig up on their own, one piece at a time, instead of being handed a clear account by the people who were actually standing there. There's a piece of dispatch audio at the center of this case worth slowing all the way down for, because it's one of the only pieces of hard evidence in this entire story that doesn't rely on anyone's memory, and unlike the two viral pieces we've already walked through, this one has never been disputed. We're sinking. Can y'all please come? A voice calling for a tow. And, is everybody on board, in good health otherwise? A dispatcher's question, the kind asked as standard procedure anytime a call like this comes in, and the answer, yeah, everybody's on. According to reporting from NBC News and the New York Post, that boat likely had around 7 people aboard and was having trouble at roughly 4 that afternoon, out near the west tip of Horn Island. A bilge pump failure, a boat operator asking to get unstuck and towed back. The GPS data confirms that boat left the island at 4:31. Here's the honest, unresolved question sitting underneath that call. We don't know for certain whether Nolan was physically on that boat at the exact moment those words were said, or whether he had already been left on the island by then. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office has confirmed Nolan did not return on that boat. So somewhere in the window between that call and 4:31, when GPS shows the boat actually departing, Nolan was no longer with the group. What happened in that specific window, not the whole afternoon, just that narrow slice of it, is one of the central open questions of this entire case. Let's talk about where this case actually stands legally, because there's a lot of noise online about what different developments mean, and most of it overstates what's actually been confirmed. Following a meeting with the district attorney, Ben Crump confirmed that Jackson County will present this case to a grand jury once the sheriff's office concludes its investigation. That is a real, confirmed development, and it's a meaningful one, but it's worth being precise about what it does and doesn't mean. A grand jury referral is not the same thing as criminal charges being filed. It means a panel of citizens will eventually review the evidence gathered and decide whether there's enough to justify an indictment. According to reporting from Law and Crime, a grand jury referral for an unnatural or suspicious death is actually standard procedure in Jackson County. The district attorney's office has stated publicly that authorities have not indicated this is currently being treated as a criminal investigation. That doesn't mean nothing will come of it. It means the process itself, at this stage, isn't confirmation of a specific outcome in either direction. Civil rights attorney Tyler Bailey laid out what a grand jury could actually be looking at if this does move forward, and it's a wider net than most people assume. It doesn't have to mean a homicide charge. It could involve tampering with evidence, obstruction, accessory after the fact, anything connected to how the aftermath of Nolan's disappearance was handled, independent of how he actually died. That distinction matters, because it means even if the ultimate cause of death is never conclusively proven to be anything other than an accident, there could still be legal consequences tied to what happened after. The missing phone content, the delayed reporting, the inconsistencies in the accounts given. Then there's a question everyone keeps circling back to and still doesn't have an answer for. How did Nolan actually die? The state of Mississippi conducted an autopsy shortly after Nolan's body was identified. As of the most recent public updates, full results, including toxicology, have not been released. Toxicology testing routinely takes weeks regardless of how much public attention a case receives, and the Mississippi State Lab does not fast-track cases based on media coverage. Separately, the family arranged an independent autopsy performed by pathologists in Washington, D.C., with no ties to Mississippi, funded in part by Colin Kaepernick. Those results have also faced delays. Crump has pointed to logistical issues transporting Nolan's body rather than anything related to the findings themselves, though that explanation has understandably done little to ease the family's frustration given how much time has passed. 2 separate autopsies conducted by 2 separate teams with 2 separate sets of findings still pending. If those 2 reports come back describing fundamentally different pictures of what happened to Nolan Wells, that divergence alone becomes one of the most significant developments this case has produced. If they align, it closes off one of the most persistent sources of public suspicion. Either way, until both are actually released, everything built on top of that uncertainty, every theory, every online argument, every confident claim about what really happened, is standing on an incomplete foundation. There's another thread here worth including, because it goes directly to how strained the relationship between this family and local law enforcement has actually been. Under Mississippi law, a crime victim's family is entitled to receive an incident report within 72 hours. That window came and went. By the time Christine and Elmore sat down with the district attorney, they still didn't have it. Christine has said publicly that the last time anyone from the sheriff's department had directly contacted her before that meeting was a previous Tuesday, and even that contact was a single text message, one she sent herself, simply asking for an update on her own son's death investigation, more than a week into an active investigation. That was the entire extent of direct communication from the lead agency handling her son's case. Part of what came out of the meeting with the DA's office was an acknowledgement of that gap. The district attorney's office has since said it would take over as a primary point of contact going forward, with a dedicated victim advocate assigned specifically to the family. That's a real concrete change. It's also worth sitting with the fact that it took a public press conference, a national attorney, and weeks of silence before that basic level of communication was put in place at all. It's worth taking a moment here to explain why a case like this one, a body recovered from open water, no visible signs of trauma reported at the scene, can still take this long to produce even a preliminary cause of death, because that delay is one of the most misunderstood parts of this entire story. When a body has been in the water for an extended period, a straightforward external examination often can't rule things in or out the way people assume it can. Water itself can obscure or wash away exactly the kind of evidence, bruising, ligature marks, defensive wounds, that would otherwise point clearly toward one explanation or another. That's part of why toxicology matters so much here. A full toxicology screen doesn't just look for illegal substances. It can help establish whether alcohol or other compounds were present at levels that would affect someone's ability to swim, to stay conscious, or to call for help, which matters enormously in distinguishing an accidental drowning from something that involved another person's actions. It can also help establish a more precise window for time of death, which in turn helps investigators figure out whether Nolan was still alive during that unexplained gap between roughly 3 o'clock and the boat's confirmed 4:31 departure, or whether whatever happened to him had already occurred by then. While all of this has played out, the press conferences, the disputed video, the disputed photo, the phone that still needs a joint inspection, Nolan's family has also had to do something no family should have to manage in parallel with demanding an investigation. Plan a funeral for an 18-year-old in public, with the entire country watching. Services were held at Centerpoint Church in Ocean Springs, with visitation in the morning, followed immediately by the service. Reverend Al Sharpton officiated at the family's request. Filmmaker Tyler Perry covered the full cost of the funeral. Colin Kaepernick helped fund the independent autopsy. A celebration of life followed at the Jackson County Fairgrounds. Christine has been clear about why she wanted it framed that way, rather than as a traditional somber service. Nolan, she said, would not want everyone sitting around crying in silence. He'd want a party. So that's what she gave him, open to former teammates, coaches, classmates from every level he ever played at, and notably, open to media as well. That last detail is worth sitting with for a moment. A mother who still didn't have her son's official cause of death chose to let cameras into his funeral anyway, because she has said more than once that the moment the world stops watching is the moment this case risks losing whatever momentum has forced answers out of local officials. We also want to name something uglier than false photos and misidentified voices, because it's part of the honest record of this case too. Ben Crump has confirmed that people connected to this case, including friends who cooperated with investigators like Tristan Shepard, have received actual death threats since Nolan's body was found. Shepard himself has said as much directly. He and others in the friend group have been targeted since coming forward, which is part of why he declined to appear on camera, even while giving detailed, on-record statements to reporters and to the sheriff's department. Crump has also confirmed that AI-generated videos falsely depicting Christine have circulated online, fabricated footage of a grieving mother, built and spread for engagement, while she is simultaneously trying to plan her son's funeral. Whatever position anyone holds on the underlying facts of this case, that specific cruelty deserves to be named for what it is. Crump's message on it has been consistent. Nobody's life should be threatened in the pursuit of the truth, and nobody should be presumed guilty before actual evidence exists, a standard that has to apply to every name connected to this story, on every side of it, or it doesn't mean anything at all. Let's be disciplined about where this actually leaves us, because that discipline is exactly what this case has needed from the beginning. Here is what's confirmed. Nolan Wells traveled to Horn Island on July 4th with a group of friends and was last seen by them around 3 that afternoon. His body was recovered on July 6th and identified through dental records. GPS data confirms his friend's boat left the island at 4:31 and made several additional stops before reaching its final dock that evening. A towing call was placed, reporting the boat taking on water, with a dispatcher confirming everyone aboard was accounted for, though whether Nolan was still with the group at that exact moment remains unclear. Nolan's phone was left behind on that boat, later recovered by his family using a location tracking app, and found to have no Snapchat activity in the 24 hours before he disappeared. A widely circulated pool photo has been conclusively dated to 8 days before Horn Island. A widely circulated video of an argument has been confirmed, on the record, to feature a different person's voice, not Nolan's. The district attorney has confirmed this case will be presented to a grand jury once the sheriff's investigation concludes. Here is what's disputed: whether Nolan told Katie he was heading back to the boat, as her family's account states, or whether he told his friends he was choosing to stay behind, as their account states. Whether the clothing described in the police report, black shorts, matches the blue swim trunks his family says photos from that day actually show him wearing. Whether the missing Snapchat content and location data mismatch on his phone indicate anything beyond ordinary technical inconsistency. And here is what remains simply unknown: the official cause and manner of Nolan Wells' death, pending both the state autopsy's toxicology results and the family's independent autopsy. What specifically happened in the roughly 90 minutes between Nolan being last seen and his friend's boat completing its documented movements that evening? Whether any criminal charges will ultimately result from a grand jury process that hasn't yet begun. Whether Katie will ever give a direct, on-record account in her own words, rather than one relayed by her family, and if she does, whether it confirms or complicates the version her sister has already made public. It's worth restating plainly one more time what this list is not. It is not a claim that Katie did anything wrong. It is not a claim that Nolan's friends are lying collectively or individually. It is not a claim that a crime occurred at all. Two people can each give an honest, good-faith account of a chaotic, crowded, alcohol-involved afternoon on a barrier island and still end up remembering it differently. Memory is not a recording device, and grief and public pressure both have a way of hardening a person's recollection into something more certain-sounding than it originally was. What this list is instead is a record of exactly where the confirmed facts stop and the disputes begin, drawn as precisely as the public record allows, so that nobody watching this video walks away thinking they know more than what's actually been established. That's the honest shape of this case as it stands right now. Not a verdict, not an accusation aimed at any single named individual. A list of facts, a list of open disputes between real people who were actually there, and a list of questions nobody, not the sheriff's office, not the district attorney, not the family's independent investigators, has been able to close yet. Underneath every timestamp, every GPS log, every disputed account of who said what to whom on a crowded beach, there's still a mother who cooked salmon with her son the night before he left and who has not stopped fighting for an answer since. Christine has said in more than one interview that grief doesn't move in a straight line, that some moments she can talk about her son's stories and laugh, and the next moment she can barely breathe. She's also said more than once that if Nolan were here, he'd tell her the same thing he always did. Keep talking to people, keep telling my story. That's what she's chosen to do. Press conference after press conference, even while planning the kind of service no parent should ever have to plan. There's a version of this story where all of it, the GPS logs, the towing audio, the joint phone inspection, the grand jury referral, the debunked photo, the misidentified voice, Katie's disputed account, Javon Williams' on-record statement, eventually resolves into something clean, a single agreed-upon explanation that a jury or a family or the public can actually rest on. It's also possible this case ends the way too many cases like it do, with an official finding that satisfies the legal standard for closing a file without ever fully satisfying the people who love Nolan most. Either outcome is still ahead of us, not behind us. That's the discomfort at the center of covering a case like this one, honestly. You don't get to manufacture the ending. You only get to lay out as clearly and as fairly as the record allows exactly how far the truth has traveled so far, and exactly how far it still has to go. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old, a wide receiver with a real future in front of him. A young man his own mother describes as someone who never met a stranger, who made the people around him feel seen. He was supposed to come home that 4th of July. Nobody watching this case, not the people who followed it from day one, not the people just finding it now, gets to decide what actually happened to him. A jury eventually might. Right now, all any of us have is a record laid out honestly, with the gaps left exactly where they are, instead of papered over with certainty nobody's earned yet. This has been Forensic Disconnect. We unlock the cases that deserve to be remembered.